What is up, y'all? What is up, y'all? All right, so in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to start Dockerizing our app. However, before we get to that, I want to show you a few things. And that is that I did go ahead between the last video and this one, and I built out a lot of business logic. And that's because I was realizing that it was actually hard to teach a lot of these concepts without having an actual app that does something. So we now have this social network app where you can like share recipes and comment on other people's recipes. So pretty generic app, but it did allow me to install Django REST framework, create a few endpoints, and I also added Django channels for WebSocket support. And aside from that, I also want to point this out, that I moved the location of this to the new Boston developers, and it's called Cooking Core right here. So if you want to follow along with the new repo, then hit up this URL and there you go. But either way, yep, this is the app. Like I said, you have your own profile, pretty generic. You can create recipes, and then once you have a recipe, other people can come and just comment on them, and then they can send coins as well. And then when anyone sends coins to my recipe, I can just like leave them there, or I can click this and withdraw them to my main account, which is this right here. And I did that because I'm thinking about putting like a leaderboard system in to see who can, I don't know, get the most coins. But either way, that is kind of the skinny of that. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to start Dockerizing our app. Now, eventually we're going to be setting up Docker for production, but for right now, just to get started, what I want to do is I just want to set it up for local development. And by that, I mean, we are just going to Dockerize our database, because I think I said in the last tutorial or 2 tutorials ago that we're not going to be using SQLite even for development. So we're going to be replacing this with Postgres, and that's going to be our Dockerized version of Postgres. And that's going to give us our development environment where we're going to be running Postgres and Docker, and we'll keep our main app running in that virtual environment, running through Poetry. And then eventually what we're going to do is for the production mode, we are going to be both Dockerizing the database like we do in development, but also Dockerizing the like built version of this app. So we're going to have pretty much the database and the app running in 2 containers, and then they're going to be able to communicate with each other. That's what we're going to be running on the server whenever we deploy it. But enough of this talking nonsense. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to do, and by the way, I already installed, let me see if I can find it. If I can find it. Right here. We might have installed this in the last tutorial, but this is the dependency that you're going to need for connecting to Postgres. So once you have that installed, make sure that you go ahead and delete your SQLite database if you have it. Don't need it anymore. And actually, let me just copy this in. It's probably going to be easier. I have my notes to the side here. All right. So this is the setup that we're going to need for our Postgres connection. So we switched out the engine. Again, before it was SQLite, and now we are going with our Postgres backend. And then a few things that we're going to need is a name, a user, and a password to connect to the database. And we're just keeping these all as Cooking Core, keeping it simple for now. Where is this database running? It's going to be running on the same computer localhost on this port. This is just a standard Postgres port. Atomic requests, connection max age, these are just some Postgres settings. And now with this done, we can go ahead and start with the Docker portion of it. So again, like I said, make sure you have your SQLite database deleted. And then what we are going to be doing, actually, let me talk through a little bit about this before. So I assume that you already have Docker installed on your computer, and also Docker Compose. If not, go ahead and watch my, probably the first video in my Docker series. It'll walk you through that. I don't want to repeat anything for those who I assume have it already. So go ahead and make sure you have those installed. And eventually what we're going to be doing is we are going to be creating a Docker compose.yaml file, and this is what Docker Compose is going to look for. And what this file is basically consists of multiple containers, and it just it's just what Docker Compose uses. And for production, like I said, in the production version of this, we are going to have our app and our database. However, for now, since we're not ready to set that up quite yet, instead of this Docker Compose.yaml, create Docker Compose.dev.yaml. And then whenever we are running this in our local environment, this is what we're going to pick up instead. So what exactly goes in here? And actually, let me do this again. Let me know if you like me typing all these commands one by one, or if you kind of just would rather me paste it in and then kind of talk through it, almost like a code review style. Like to try and mix things up, you know? So anyways, this is going to be our configuration for Docker Compose. Again, this is just going to be the version of Docker Compose that we're using in case they change it later on. But the meat and potatoes of this is that this Docker Compose file is made up of services. Now, right now we only have one service in here, which is our database service. But just to kind of take a step back, a service is like a piece of our application, and it's similar to like an image in Docker, but you can kind of think of them like separate, like mini servers or processes. So for example, in an application, maybe we'll have one server or process running Redis, and then we'll have another server running our like main app. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're just going to create this one service, and it's our database service. And most of this is pretty self-explanatory. This is the image that we're going to use, just a lean version of Postgres. Now this right here, restart unless stop, this is our restart policy. So unless we explicitly stop this, for example, if our well, in production, what this means is that if you ever have to like reboot your instance, then this is automatically going to start back up, and that way you don't have to like go in and manually start everything in Docker again. So this is going to be our restart policy. For our port mapping, what we're going to just do is map 5432 on our local system to this port 5432. And for the environment variables, or pretty much the environment setup for this, just make sure that your database name, the user, and the password all match whatever you have right here. So again, and you may want to keep an eye out for this, but in your Docker Compose file, you need to prefix these with Postgres _ and also this one's DB, and then that's going to refer to the name. So a little bit different naming convention, so just look out for that. And the last thing that I don't think we talked about, even in my Docker series, is volumes. So what are volumes? Well, almost all applications, they're going to require some kind of data storage. However, we want our containers themselves to be as stateless as possible. In that way, as you know, in Docker, we can remove them, we can stop them, we can start them up whenever. We want a lot of flexibility to do that. Now, volumes are a way that we can persist data in a way that can be used by the container. And you can kind of think of it like a virtual thumb drive that can be used by the container. So whenever we, for example, stop this service, that data is still going to remain. So even if we destroy this container, this volume data is still going to be there. Now, the first time that we run this Docker Compose file, which we're going to do in just a second, that's going to go ahead and create the initial volume. And then whenever, like I said, we stop it and start it again, then that volume is going to stick around. So pretty much allows you to reuse it. Now, just to go over the syntax a little bit right here. So this is basically saying that this volume, this setup right here, I'm going to create like a virtual USB drive on my computer. Refer to it as Postgres SQL-data, and use it to store the data at container path var lib Postgres data. Now, what's up with this path? Well, it's not just a random path. This is actually the default directory where the Postgres database stores and serves, or excuse me, where it stores all of its data files, like its tables, indexes, configuration files, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's pretty much what that's doing right there. And now with that said, I think I actually made this make command before. Yeah, so check it out. So I made this make command, which is, make sure you tag it as phony as well, up dependencies only. And what this is going to do is it's first going to check if you have this .env file, and if not, it's going to go ahead and touch it, or in other words, create it. And then after that, we are going to run this docker compose command. And if you don't include this flag right here, then it's going to look for that docker compose YAML by default. But we want to save that one for our production docker compose. So make sure that you explicitly say, no, we want to run the dev docker compose file right here. And this is just going to make sure that we get a new database each time. So with that said, what we can do is actually, maybe I move this down here. Well, oh well. Actually, just to make sure that, and you guys probably won't need to do this, but I just want to make sure that I'm starting fresh, since I did play around with things before this tutorial. I'm going to do docker system prune, wow, prune all. Yes, I want to wipe everything out. Is it still wiping? Okay. And I want to also do docker volume prune. And that just means if I had any volumes in there, I just want to wipe those out as well. Again, you probably won't have to do this, but just to make sure we're all starting from the same place in this tutorial. And now what I want to do is run this command, which is pretty much, if all goes well, it's going to spin up this instance right here. And that is make up dependencies only. So, okay. It looks good. I don't have it yet since I just wiped everything out, so it's gonna pull it from Docker Hub. And now we wait. Sweet. So it looks like everything is working. And now in my local, I'm gonna do make run server. And actually, yes. So because all of our data before was in SQLite and now it's in Postgres, we pretty much need to rebuild our database. And for that, since we have all our migrations, we can just do make migrate. And then I'm gonna have to create a super user as well. So all those migrations are in right there. And I'll do make super user. And actually I forgot for this, one second. I had a custom user set up so it's compatible with the New Boston ecosystem. And this is actually a pretty cool system because you have like the same account number that you can use across any of the New Boston software. But okay, so now I created a super user real quick and I'm just gonna run this again. And now with that said, let me pull up this one. All right, should be able to go into my admin panel and just log in. And it looks like it was auto-saved and sweet. So there we go, nothing broke. That means that our local version of Docker is working. Again, this make command is using docker compose to run the services in our docker compose.dev file right here. And then this is just running our Postgres database, which we hooked up to our Django app right there. All right, so things are looking good. And now with this all done, what we can do now is start working on our production version of Docker. Now the production version of Docker that we're gonna be running, it's actually gonna look pretty similar to this. The main difference is that in addition to running our database, it's also gonna run our app in a separate container. And if you're wondering, all right, well, where is that container being built? Where is it defined? That, my friend, is what we're gonna do right now. So let's go ahead and create a new file and we'll just say Docker file. And in here, we'll just go ahead and paste this in again and talk you through everything in detail. All right, so starting from the top. So our base image that we're going to use is this Buster image, and this is pretty much, well, it's Debian Buster, which is a specific version of the Debian operating system. And this one is just kind of popular for running Python apps. And then for our working directory, we are going to stick it in OPT, which stands for optional, in a subdirectory called project. And this OPT directory in Debian is just a it's just like convention for whenever you are installing optional software that's kind of not part of the main operating system. And then these you're going to find in a lot of Dockerized Python applications. Quickly, this first one is just gonna prevent you from writing .pyc files to your disk. This one is going to disable Python's input-output buffering. And then what this Python path dot does, this is going to add the current directory to Python's path. And why do we do that? It is because later on, whenever we are importing our own modules, it just makes it easier for Python to find those. Now, after this, you see kind of the that setup that we had before. So I believe in the last tutorial, this is another thing that I changed too, but let me actually find this. My cooking core project, I believe it's in right here. You see that the prefix for setting environment variables, we had to prefix it with this. Let me actually copy it, make sure I got the right one. So we want to flag this in Docker to be true. And in order to do that, for our Django app to pick it up, we just need to prefix it with this. And that way, whenever we are running these settings and it picks up this Docker setting right here, this is going to be true right here. And we already saw how exactly that works behind the scenes. And let me close this for now. All right. And close this, clean everything up. All right. So here we are just installing all of the dependencies that we're going to need, and these are the like a system. It's like a jet flying overhead, but these are like the system dependencies, not our Python dependencies, which are going to be installed right here. Well, actually, right here, what we're doing is we're just copying over this poetry lock file and also this pyproject.toml file, which is pretty much just a list of all our dependencies, and then here is where we are actually installing them with Poetry. And again, Poetry is going to be installed right here is where we're doing it. And now after that, geez, how many vehicles are flying in the air tonight? Geez, okay. Now after this, we're going to be copying over README, makefile, pretty self-explanatory. And then here, this is where we're going to start copying our actual source code. Make sure not to forget this line. And then one other thing that we're going to do is we're also going to need a local directory in our container as well. Because right now we have the settings.dev.py. However, what we're going to do in our production app is we're actually going to be setting debug equal to false. And we'll also generate another secret key. And by the way, another thing that I should have mentioned, especially when I was setting up that Django admin, I built a little helper script right here called production data. And if you just run this, it's going to give you all of the data that you need for production. So it's going to generate that account number, because remember I overwrote the user model to use this like custom, like the new Boston compatible user system basically. And the sign-in key is the equivalent of your password more or less. And the secret key, this is going to be the Django secret key that you are going to be using basically in the production version of these local settings right here. But you'll see all that. I just want to kind of point that right now in case I forget. And okay, moving on. So this, of course, like we saw, actually this is a bad comment. Let me say expose port 8000. And this is just going to be the port that our application is going to be running on locally, not the port that the user is going to hit from the outside. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up SSL, HTTPS. So they're going to be using port 443 by default. However, like this is all set up where they can just go to our domain name and that's the default port. So they don't have to like explicitly use 443 or 80 or 8000 or anything like that. But anyways, moving on to this last bit, this entry point. So this entry point in this script, by the way, it doesn't exist yet. We're going to be writing that in about like 30 seconds. But what this entry point script is it's pretty much a script that's going to be executed as soon as the container starts up. And we'll see what this script is. It's going to do stuff like install our migrations and pretty much like run the app. So anyways, with that being said, let me go ahead and copy this, because what this line is saying is, hey, in your scripts directory, I'm going to look for a file called entrypoint.sh, and then I'm going to copy that over. So yeah, we're going to need one right now. So for this, and again, what this is the main command that's executed whenever this entire thing starts up. So let me copy this over as well. By the way, this is a lot easier for me, so I really hope you guys like it, not having to type in explain things at the same time. All right, so all this is doing, and by the way, this set E flag just means that if there's any errors right here, then stop. Don't try to like power through them, because hopefully we don't get error, but if we do, we want like things to stop so we can actually like check out what's going on and fix it. This is just setting a quick little variable to avoid having to type it multiple times. This is just going to echo out what we're doing. And again, this is just going to collect static, and I'm sure you already know what that is. And then this is going to run our migrations like we just did a few minutes ago. And then this last one is kind of the meat and potatoes to tie everything together. We're going to be using Poetry to run Daphne, because we're no longer using run server since this is a production environment. And also, we are going to be no longer using WSGI. Like I said, I installed Django channels, and that means that we're going to be using Daphne, which is capable of running ASCII. In other words, it just gives us asynchronous, or the ability to use WebSockets, more or less. And I already have all of this set up. So in yeah, all that set up. I don't need to walk you through that. We're going to be running it on port 8000, and then this is just our local host, basically. All right, so that is our Docker file. Again, this is pretty much the blueprint for creating the container to run this Django application. So now once we have this done, we are now, just to kind of walk you through what we're going to do, we're going to create a new Docker Compose file that's capable of running this in production mode, which is both the database and this Docker file right here. So how do we do that? Well, we go ahead and create that new Docker compose.yaml file, and I can get rid of this one, and instead I'll paste in this right there. Okay, so we already know what the majority of this does. Again, version, services. Again, instead of just one service like we had before, which was our local database, instead in production we're going to be running two services, our Postgres database, and again this is all the same settings we had before, and also this other service right here, which is our app. So this of course is going to be our Django app. And what is this saying? So the first thing it's saying is, okay, for this container, we are just going to be building whatever is in this current directory. And again, this is my Docker Compose file right here. And in that same directory is this Docker file. So more or less, this app is going to reference this Docker file right here. So whenever Docker Compose builds it, it's pretty much just going to execute all of this. And then last but not least, this entry point right here. And the restart policy, we want the same as our database, where unless we explicitly stop one of these, then just, yeah, keep it running. And that way, like I said, if we ever restart our instance, or like the power goes out or something, whenever it boots back up, we don't have to go in and manually restart everything. Of course, port mapping right here. And also this depends on this service right here. And what this means is whenever Docker Compose is kind of like running these services, wait till this one is booted up first and then run this one right here, because we don't want our app running if the database isn't like ready yet. And the last couple settings are, again, setting some environment variables. However, this time we do need to change one of our database settings. So for the databases, and this is another cool part about this, how we set everything up. You know how I said that sometimes we need to be able to access nested settings from our environment variables? So check this out. Now, I'm kind of glad I get to like show off how everything's tied together right now. So now in our project settings base right here, so what we need to do is we need to update the host right here. So instead of localhost, what we want to do is we want to say whenever we're running in Docker production, then we want to use this database right here. In Docker is going to be able to refer to it simply as DB. Now, since this isn't like a simple environment variable, because by this I mean, usually if you set an environment variable, it's just going to override this entire thing. But we don't want to override this entire dictionary right here. We just want to override one of the values in here, this host, and keep everything else the same. So because in the last tutorials, how we set up everything nice and special, that's what we can do. We can override default, host, and set that to DB. Pretty cool. And then the last thing that we're going to change is in this local settings path. Again, just to show you how this is all patched together. When we are not running it in Docker, just for local development, then we have this set equal to local settings dev.py, which is this right here. And this is kind of like our default development environment settings. However, for production, we're going to be creating a new file. So we don't have, we just don't want to reuse the same secret key, and definitely don't want to have it running in debug mode. So this is pretty much saying that look for this file, and we don't have it created yet. We'll actually create this when we deploy. But yeah, that's pretty much all that's going on here. So, and yeah, I think that's actually all we needed to cover. We won't run this right now because we're going to be deploying in the next video and running it right then. But yeah, I think pretty much good to go. So in the next video, like I said, we're going to be actually deploying this, spinning up a EC2 instance, and let's see what else we're going to be doing. We will set up an elastic IP, point it to our instance. We'll be setting up a domain name. We'll be setting up like SSL to make sure that we can access everything over HTTPS. And yeah, we'll even deploy the front end. I know that this tutorial series is more for like Docker and the back end, but I'm guessing that if anyone's like following along and they're going to be doing this in like a real job, you're probably going to end up deploying the front end as well. So we'll go through the process of deploying the front end to S3 and then setting up like CDN and stuff, yada yada. It's going to be awesome, very entertaining, educational. That's my pitch. And on that note, yeah, I'll see you guys next time.